everyone for joining. I'm going to turn over to Joan completely, and she's going to have a presentation for you.
Oops. Slideshow. Okay, so I have to admit to a little magical thinking on putting together this talk, because I thought if I read books, entire books about weeds, and pulled together a presentation about weeds, that I would walk out at the end of this talk and find no weeds in my garden. But that didn't happen to be the case. So I'm in the same boat as all of you in identifying and removing weeds from my garden, so my preferred plants can thrive. So start with a definition. One simple definition is a plant in the wrong place. I actually like modification of Justice Stewart's definition, that he doesn't quite know how to describe it, but he knows one when he sees one. So here I have my vegetable bed and my carrots, and then the California poppies, which side by side, they actually look pretty different. But when you're standing up looking down and they're not side by side, you could easily mistake one for the other. And a poppy will just definitely just overrun my carrots. So mainly weeds in my garden are non-native winter annual grasses and plants that have inadvertently become pests because they're escaped ornamentals or escaped agricultural plants, and even trees like eucalyptus that can take over a hillside and cause extinction of the native plants, I would consider to be weeds. Occasionally a native in special circumstances, like here where a poppy is right next to a carrot seedling. There's one special circumstance where another native may be considered a weed, and that is if a scrub jay or a stellar jay planted an oak seedling right next to a house. Oaks are considered a keystone species. They support hundreds of species of invertebrates, insects, and birds, and are very important in the ecosystem, but they shouldn't be right next to the house. So if I ever remove an oak seedling right next to the house, I plant about 100 acorns further away. What is amazing about oaks is that jays can swallow up to 5 acorns. I mean, they're mid-sized birds, fly up to a mile, plant all 5, eat 1, and the 4 can grow to be oak trees, or they can be eaten by other animals. So you can do that too. You can do what a jay can do. Here's an array of acorns in what's called masting, when you get a really great supply of acorns some years. But we're going to talk about the regular weeds, and weeds just love a disturbed site. So this would be a quintessentially disturbed site. You have all the topsoil removed, you have all the original plants removed. I suspect this green thing down at the bottom is in a pot. I don't think it's really planted. And at the first rain, this will be covered with pioneering plants that are primarily weeds. So if you have, once this rains and it's covered with weeds, say a 30 by 30 foot area of ground, that's 900 square feet, and you're on your hands and knees and you're assiduously weeding, say 3 by 3 feet every day when you come home from work, out of your bedroom from work, and can weed 9 square feet a day, you're going to be done in 100 days. So let's see, that's the rest of February, March, April, and into May. That's a lot of weeding. So I think the one benefit of having a disturbed site that does support weeds is that you know that your site can support life, period. There are such disturbed sites that it doesn't support life. This is actually an area that was the drainage of a mining operation, and after 70 years, it still just has some superficial mosses that don't even have roots in the ground that survive on surface water. So you can be happy about weeds in the sense that you know your garden site will support life. So since weeding can be so arduous, think about replace, not remove. Any weed that you remove will be replaced by another weed in a blink, in a flash. So if you plant a desired plant, in my case, in my garden, I prefer natives and edibles in its place, and you defend it from weeds a little bit until it gets established, you can suppress weeds by your desired plants. So if you're growing a shrub or a ground cover that will ultimately reach 6 feet in diameter, so that's a 3-foot radius from your geometry, you're going to recall it's pi r squared. That's 28 square feet of coverage. So that's 3 days of weeding. So you can kick off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday if you have a nice shrub. Here I have an Arctostaphylos densiflora. It's not yet 6 feet in diameter, it's young, but it will get to be 6 feet in diameter. It's a ground cover relative of the beautiful madrones. And when it gets to be 6 feet, it's going to have my 28 square feet of coverage. And there's exactly one weed, actually there's another little one, at 12 o'clock, which you could pull out extremely easily. And so I'm going to count pulling out this one weed as my 3 days of weeding. Just check it off my calendar. Done, done, done. So here's a sidebar on when you're planting your shrubs or your ground cover. 2 really important rules. Number 1, if it says it wants to grow to 6 feet in diameter, plant them 6 feet apart. So here's 3 feet and here's 3 feet. So center to center is 6 feet. And they really want to grow to their mature size, and you don't want to be clipping, 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 or having them interdigitate. If you do plant them in a grid, you're going to have sight lines, especially when they're small, of bare areas. Whereas if you do offset them, 2 things happen. One is that the diamonds that are relatively large are going to turn into relatively small triangles, and the sight lines are going to have plant material every sight line. These small areas are not wasted. They can be used for annual spring wildflowers to high effect. And also bare areas in your garden are habitat for ground nesting native solitary bees. So little patches are going to have some breathing room for your plants. But it will also be a little patch for weeds to grow too. So you have to listen to the rest of my talk. So weeds are amazing. They outgrow many of the plants that you dote on constantly, and they primarily reproduce by seeds, although there are some exceptions. And the seeds are engineering miracles. So here's a weed that we have a lot of in Sonoma County, and it's called fillery. And these are self-sowing seeds. So this is in the dry form. If you sprinkle water on them, these awns will go completely straight. And then as they dry, they curl up, and you can see little barbs on them. So when the seeds fall on the ground in the morning dew, they're completely straight. And then by mid-afternoon, they're curled and they spiral, drill into the ground. And with their barbs, they don't drill out. So they actually are self-sowing seeds. It's just amazing. Have you ever walked into a weedy patch and these little yellow balls come flying out of the ground, hitting you on your knees, up to your hips? If you bend over, they're going to hit your glasses or even your eyes if you're not wearing glasses. So you have hit a patch of cardamine, M-I-N-E, cardamine, not cardamom, which is a delicious spice that is commonly used in Swedish baking, but cardamine. And it's a weed. There is a native cardamine oligosperma, but these are weeds. And it's in the mustard family. So it has little flowers, and these are immature seed pods. When the seed pod is mature, when the seeds inside them are mature, they're a little fatter, and the pods split, and the sides of the pods are called valves, and they curl up faster than you can even see and throw the seeds 3 feet in the air, 6 feet away for seed dispersal. And they green up right after the first rain. They're gone by March. I don't really worry too much about these weeds because they disappear so quickly, but it just cracks me up that the energy and the engineering involved in creating these seed pods is just amazing. The worst seeds in my garden are foxtails, and that would be the case for any dog owner. because they do get in awful places. So it's a big challenge. I mean, a huge challenge. So a lot of weed information comes from agriculture because they're producing a crop and they're making a living off of having their crop come in and not the weeds. So if you just take one plant, the common mullein, which I think is native to areas like Turkey, 200,000 seeds per plant. And these seeds are in the soil. They're very tiny. You cannot see them. And they're going to be viable alive if you plow them up and bring them up to the surface for nearly 40 years. So you're going to be weeding basically forever. That's the good news. And so let's look at some particularly vexing weeds. Everyone always starts talking about the dandelion. The dandelion originated in the Himalayas, believe it or not. And in pre-1945, so colonial times up till now, or even historic times up till that point, lawns used to be polyculture, more like a meadow, more like a grassland, not monoculture. You could have clovers mixed with your lawn. Clovers are nitrogen fixers, and they're actually going to have root nodules with bacteria in them that take atmospheric nitrogen, turn it into fertilizer for themselves and their neighbors. The flowers in the lawn, little daisies and dandelions, do produce pollen and nectar for bees and butterflies, and then those flowers produce seeds, in which case little things like goldfinches can come in and eat the seeds. So you can have a whole potpourri of wildlife supported by a polyculture meadow rather than a lawn. Grasslands can have up to 50% plants other than pure grasses and be a lot more interesting. When you think about how successful dandelions are, it is because of their engineering. So their flowers get pollinated. The flowers turn down during development to protect them, and then they turn up again for seed release. So these are the seeds floating in the air. This is called a pappus, and they can float quite long distances. And what some engineer decided to look at was when these do float down to the ground, they don't just plop down in any direction. They plop down in the ideal direction for the barbs to take hold and the seed to be anchored in the ground to make another dandelion. So the engineering is really quite remarkable. But they became socially unacceptable. They became the sign of a bad person, a bad gardener. It was like having a old car in your driveway up on blocks. So the monoculture lawn became fashionable after the development of a selective herbicide, meaning would kill dandelions and not kill your lawn, would kill dicots and not monocots, and that was called 2,4-D. So the monoculture lawn became so hard to maintain, because obviously these herbicides, weeds became resistant to them and no one wants to put poison on their garden, that the current lawn replacement, the current monoculture look is basically artificial plastic turf, which we hope people are moving away from too. But there is some ways to control dandelions. If you don't have a lawn, because their habitat is an open, sunny place where you're mowing the neighboring plants. If you have a no-mow lawn or a lawn area where your dog can run around of bunch grasses, then you're going to have fewer dandelions. And you will have some around the edge, so you can talk about the engineering of the dandelions. So here's where the monocots and the dicots are different. So a dicot has 2 seed leaves, and these would be the first true leaves, and a monocot would only have 1. When a seed germinates, the root goes down, the stem goes up, and the growth point is up at the top. So this seedling is vulnerable to any little mouse or vole or any of the other critters that you're going to hear about at the upcoming webinar. And one little bite and it's a goner. It's only safe after it's matured and has branch points and has a lot of growth points. But at this point, it's extremely vulnerable. So monocots, grasses, orchids, lilies, all our cereal grains, they're like, I don't want to be so vulnerable. And I'm going to keep my growth point down low and send up one leaf into the air. And that can be nibbled on as much as it wants to, and I'm still safe. So instead of fighting the dandelion battle, which I think is essentially lost unless you get rid of your lawn, I want people to turn their attention to the oxalis battle. So the oxalis was introduced to California. It was thought around 1900. It is from South Africa. It is a weed. And it is the one weed where I do tend to try to get rid of all the roots, because in the roots, it has bulblets from which it can reproduce. All the other weeds, I actually leave the roots in place. I just get the crown and leave the roots in place for healthy soil. But the oxalis does take over grasslands. It is limiting the food supply of our owls and hawks and coyotes that feed on the grassland foragers. It's very severely affecting the mission blue butterflies for the San Franciscos in the audience. And it's hard to remove because of the bulblets. But we do have a native oxalis, the Oxalis oregana, which is, of course, much prettier because it's native. So of the grasses, unfortunately, about 99% of grassland has been taken over by European winter annuals. We do have 300 species of native bunch grasses. They can live 300 years. They can send roots down 20 feet. And they do have flowers. Flowers, the reproductive part of a plant, has pollen and has the ovum to make a seed, and they get together, but they're wind pollinated. They're not pollinated by an insect or a bird. So they don't have petals. They're basically signs saying, well, come eat here. And they can, they're beautiful in their own aesthetic way, especially waving in the breeze. So I have had a few native grasses. This one is our state grass, Nacella pulchra. But most of the grasses that you're going to find in your garden are going to be weeds, and feel free to remove them and replace them with native bunch grasses. So our grassland habitat is very important for native plants. There is actually an organization called the California Native Grassland Association. And it points out these advantages with this huge root structure, because they're perennial, they live for hundreds of years, is that the carbon storage is below ground. It's not susceptible to fire. It's fire safe. And this below ground root structure provides water filtration, water storage, flood and erosion control. And because they're bunch grasses and not sod forming grasses, has open areas in between for an array of wildflowers and other perennial flowers, and supports biodiversity. So because of inadvertent introduction of plants and our building of houses and roads, et cetera, we've wiped out most of the grasslands. So if you have a grassy area in your yard, I think looking into native bunch grasses would be well worth your while. So let's go back to basics, and you're in a startup and you're asked to design a plant. So first and foremost, you have the leaves that are performing that wonderful activity called photosynthesis. You're taking carbon dioxide from the air, and there seems to be plenty of that, water from the ground, sunlight, blue and red wavelength from the sun, and creating glucose. You can pile those glucose molecules up to make starch for food or cellulose for structure. The plant also wants to flower and pollinate and produce seeds for the next year. And the plant gives food for absolutely everybody else on the planet. So all the animals, all the insects, all the fungi, and most bacteria, a couple bacteria can do photosynthesis, but most cannot. They are heterotrophs. They eat other things rather than being an autotroph growing food, which would be plants. Oh, and there's that one little last thing. It does offshoot oxygen in creating sugars from carbon dioxide and water. And we tend to use oxygen all the time, every breath. So if we're going to design a plant for an herbivore, you want the top to break off easily above the growth points that we talked about earlier with the dicot monocot differentiation. You want the roots to be able to store carbohydrates to give that plant energy to regrow that top growth after it's grazed off. And you want those roots to be really strong and they're not pulled out by grazing. So this is Snowball, and he's a Corriedale sheep. So these are the exact characteristics that make weeding really challenging. If you jerk out a plant, the top is going to break off cleanly above the growth points. The roots are going to have stored carbohydrates and regrow. So the leaf will literally be laughing. The plant will literally be laughing at you like, is that all you got? And the roots are strong enough to not be disturbed by weeding. So the grasses and other monocots have a fibrous root system. They really stick into the soil. Dicots have many of them have really obvious tap roots, like the carrots and the poppies that we saw on the first slide. So these monocots evolved after the dinosaurs with the presence of the large megafauna, which were all herbivores. And if you go to the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, you're going to be able to meet remains of the herbivores that were here before all the ice ages. And now we have herbivores that are domesticated animals, sheep, cows, and goats largely. But we had all those herbivores around, and the grassland is actually sustained by grazing. The rumen of the herbivore is basically a fermentation tank to break down cellulose into the sugars and produce manure. So they are the lawnmowers that actually fertilize through the other end of the animal. So these plants really evolved great diversity with herbation. So there is an alternative to pulling out a weed, because you can only do that right after rain when there's enough soil, and you're going to use a tool. My favorite tool is the sod cutter. This is a serrated blade, and or a hoe for larger areas. I actually don't dig this deep personally because I try to keep all my fungi happy in my soil, but this is a paddle hole and the sod cutters. So in the movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, when the Coke bottle became the most popular tool in the village, and it caused discord. If anyone took my sod cutter, it would cause discord in our house. So there's lots of shapes of hoes. There's the paddle hoe, and there's saddle hoes. These are great for if you have gravel pathways, permeable pathways that allow water to penetrate rather than roll off and go into storm gutters. And it grows those little tiny weeds that you don't want to really pull out individually. You can scrape away with a saddle hoe and make your pathways clear. For the vegetable garden, if you don't want to necessarily be on your hands and knees all the time, you can have hoes that are narrow or pointed and get in between your rows. But generally for working around a precious plant that's just getting established, you're going to need hand tools. And you can whack away with basically a hand hoe or the sod cutters. Can be super helpful. I've tried some of these others and I just don't have enough strength to get under the weeds with a forward action on a lot of these designs. So if you've had success with them, that's great. So when you pull out a weed or cut off, just cut up under the crown of the weed and leave the roots in place, you have residue management. So in farming terms, if you're harvesting wheat, the whole rest of the plant is residue. So in gardening terms, that would be residue in your yard. And I'm sure you don't have a harvester like this at home. So you've got your grain can, and you can do home composting, which is a subject all unto itself. And I do a lot of weed mulching, meaning leave weeds in place. I turn them upside down, have the roots facing up. If one little root is touching the ground, that weed will survive. But if you want to turn into mulch, you do need to turn them upside down. So here's a Quercus lobata, a valley oak, and a understory plant, which is called a Ribes viburnifolium, which is a really pretty evergreen native gooseberry that will grow 8 feet in diameter. So it's going to actually cover a lot of weeds. And there is a gravel area next door. So this half of the plant got double dose of leaves and has great weed suppression. The other half of the plant didn't get a double dose of weeds. And so I'm actually going to have to go out and weed there. But with years and years of leaf accumulation, leaving leaves in place, they're really, really easy to pull out. But everyone pretty much knows the benefits of mulching their yard, and you can buy mulch in plastic bags, but you can use weeds and leaves as mulch. It's just like the duff in a native landscape. Their mulch retains moisture, reduces erosion from water and wind. It does decompose and turn into new soil. It also provides habitat for insects. You may have a caterpillar in your oak tree. When it pupates, it's going to drop down to the ground because it's a sitting duck during that metamorphosis and then fly out. So you really don't want a lawn or foot traffic under a tree. You want to leave it for a natural habitat. And mulch is definitely slow weed growth. And even if you do have weeds, they're really, really easy to remove. My preference is to have a plastic-free zone in my garden, actually a reduced plastic zone in my house too. So weed barriers work short-term. They look good the week you put them down, but you get the tiniest layer of dust or dirt or dropped leaves from plants that you planted within that area or next to that area, and you will get weeds germinating above the barrier. The roots are going to penetrate the barrier because water penetrates the barrier, and roots can be really, really tiny and get into any tiny spot. And when the roots go through that barrier, they are impossible to pull out, whereas a regular root with a lot of mulch is relatively easy to pull out. And you know, it's plastic in the garden and it will break down, it will add to the microplastic burden. And the soil underneath really looks quite dead even after, you know, its use in the garden. So it's really not building healthy soil, and it's really very, very short term. So there's an alternative. You can do sheet mulching. If you have an especially weedy area or a lawn area that you're going to convert to garden or vegetables, you can lay down cardboard and then pile on layers and layers and layers of mulch, up to 12 inches thick if you want to. Water each layer completely. You can plant perennial plants right afterwards or wait a longer time to plant the annual plants. And the idea is, because we saw the slide earlier with 200,000 mullein seeds in the soil, if a seed underneath chooses to germinate, the roots can go down, but the head of the plant is going to bump into this cardboard until it decomposes, and your established plants are going to be there to help you control weeds and not be able to get light and therefore die. So sheet mulching is, or lasagna mulching, comes with a number of terms, is really, really helpful. So one question is, how long do you keep weeding? Well, you keep weeding until you can't get out to the garden anymore. It's basically forever. The seed bank has seeds in it that can germinate years and decades later in succession. So when you clear out an area, the weeds that are there, or the seeds that are there, are going to say, oh, great, my turn, and germinate. Seeds are going to blow from your neighbors, even if you clear out or reduce your seed bank. On the other hand, you can find the emergence of some really special plants, like here's miner's lettuce. Claytonia perfoliata. I know Latin names are crazy, but this one is fortunately obvious. The younger leaves are heart-shaped, but when it starts to flower, the leaf is a complete circle with a stem coming right in the center. So perforated, like a perforated piece of paper, foliata leaf. So perforated leaf, Claytonia perfoliata, miner's lettuce. And I'm purposely not weeding the area around the miner's lettuce until the miner's lettuce goes to seed and drops their seed, because they're really delicate plants. And if you weed around them, you inadvertently kill them. So this is procrastination, but I'm procrastinating for a very good purpose. So if you find a plant, you can take a picture of it, especially if it has a flowering part, and use a site like iNaturalist, which is free, Seek, which is the junior version of iNaturalist, and find the name of the plant. Picture this is a commercial product, which is $20 a year, which has 10,000 species loaded, so you can find a lot of plants. And you can find more about plants with CalFlora and CalScape sites. So you can also find out in person what native plants look like by hikes at regional parks or out and about with CNPS and other organizations. So here I was out in the pasture and I saw this little tiny green plant. You can see everything around it is a European winter annual weed, and dead, was hundreds of yards away from any irrigation, but you can see that it's bright green and flowering. And it's a Navarisha, which are cute little plants, and actually not all that common. So just imagine the engineering of a plant growing at the end of summer with no irrigation, with no rainfall since last February. It's just a remarkable feat to me. So what have I not covered? I have not mentioned anything that ends in the letters C-I-D-E, side. So herbicides. Oh, actually, I did mention them. The selective herbicides that were invented in 1945 to try to eliminate dandelions from your lawn, but they didn't work because plants get resistant. So there are lots of sides around. There's pre-emergence, post-emergence, desiccants, organic herbicides. And I found information from UC Nursery and Floriculture Alliance, which is a part of the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, who talks about organic herbicides having effectiveness on weeds that are 12 days old. Now, we had our mega rain in October, so everybody had 12-day-old weeds 12 days after that, and every 12 days after that. So even at 26 days, these herbicides have less effectiveness. So I would rather not apply an herbicide every 12 days since October. I would just wait till and weed. Herbicides, farmers are finding herbicide resistance all the time. So it's a short-term solution to me. So take-home points. If a plant is not happy and growing robustly, consider removing or replacing, because plants, your desired garden plants, are your best weeders or slowing down weeds. There's a reminder that some plants really take a long time to get established. Here is a 1-year-old Buckeye seedling. So it's maybe 4 inches tall. I just took it out of its pot. And the pot is specially designed to grow trees. It has vertical ridges, so the roots go down instead of going around and around. It has large holes in the bottom, so the roots are air trimmed. I prefer to just put seeds in the ground, but for this example, I actually planted a seedling. And all the leaves that were present over the summer went to making roots. Infrastructure, 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 roots, roots, roots. And only when it's happy with its root system will it start growing big, like this oak tree here, and these beautiful Quercus lobata. So you have to be patient for some plants, but you want your plants to be happy. So, and being happy means respecting what the plant wants: sun, shade, dry, moisture. That famous grid where you can decide where to plant your plants. It's probably helpful to allocate a specific time for weeding, not look at a corner of your garden and say, oh, I'm going to weed all of that, because it's probably going to be harder than it looks and maybe frustrating. So 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever your weeding tolerance is. Sometimes procrastination works. You can let the weeds fight it out and remove 5 big weeds instead of hundreds of tiny ones. You probably do want to get them out of your garden before they set seeds, so you have less weeding the following year. But as we know, you have a lot in your seed bank as it is. And I always find you can invite friends over for a glass of wine, a cup of tea, but you can go weeding before you sit down and chat, which is things my friends do in each other's gardens, believe it or not. So open for questions. Here's a harvest eggplant, padron peppers, and sun gold tomatoes.
Ooh, perfect. Thank you. It was such a good talk. I've actually had a bunch of notes and I learned a lot about it. So let's start out with a few different questions that have been popping up. Something that came up earlier on, I think you were talking a little bit about clovers and stuff, but someone was asking about cover crops and clovers, and they were going to be putting it throughout a lot of their garden, I believe for like that winter kind of time period. But what was maybe the downsides of that, or what do they have to worry about or look into throughout the year with that kind of a method?
I don't know if the downside to a cover crop. Really, I find the easiest cover crop is fava beans. They're huge. You can harvest them the next summer and use your own seeds for the next year. I've got about 10 years worth of fava bean harvest from the previous year. And you can plant them 6 inches apart, have a totally fava bean covered area that would be normally empty in the winter, like your vegetable garden, your summer vegetable garden. So I plant them in November, hopefully just before the first rain. This first rain obviously came in October, so that kind of beat me. And I actually don't use any irrigation on them at all. And in areas that I can, I let them go all the way to maturity to June to be able to harvest the dried beans. But they're big. There's lots and lots of clovers. There are seeds of clovers that you can overseed your crop, and they can reseed really easily. And it is fun to pull them out and actually see with your own eyes the root nodules. There's lupins, which would be native, with beautiful blue flowers, and they're
I love lupins.
also, yeah, and annual and perennial lupins. So cover crops are key. Find what your garden likes and experiment with a few different ones. But any area that's going to be bare in the winter, definitely plant with a cover crop.
Go some cover crops, yeah. Is it a good time to, is there like a timeline you want to do for planting the seeds earlier on? I'm guessing like mid-fall or something, but is anything like that?
I mean, yeah. So right. I mean, it's like get off the bus stop, one before me. Like, when are you going to know that first rain? But October, November.
Yeah, perfect. I have a few different questions, but a little quick one. Someone was asking about, you talked about dandelions, and you're saying that different kinds of plants are easy to pull up, and some of them, or like the roots go with them, and it's not that. They were asking, what's the best method for dealing with dandelions, or do you have to just kind of deal with them, or how do you take care of them?
Well, so there's some dandelions, and there's some sow thistle. There's some other plants that are very dandelion-like. I take my that Japanese tool, the hand axe. It looks like a small hoe. It's handheld, and just go whack. And if you're right under the crown, you've eliminated the plant. The oxalis has the root bulblets, and so then you have to get rid of the roots. But a dandelion has a taproot, and if you're just under the crown, you've killed the plant. You turn it upside down.
You just kind of like chop it where the top of the root area.
Yeah, if you have enough energy to go whack. Because it's only right after it rains that the soil is wet enough that you can pull out a plant. Because you're just going to pull off the top, and it's just going to laugh at you. I mean, you can hear the plant laughing, but a nice energetic whack.
Mhm. And I guess there's definitely a lot of question or a lot of interest and questions about oxalis. I think that's just the most difficult and most widely everywhere kind of
Yeah,
plant.
so there's a
So,
publication called Bay Nature. I don't know, do you ever read Bay Nature? It's
I have, yeah.
really wonderful. And so they have a recent article on oxalis and just was eye-opening to how awful it is. So yeah, if you
Mhm.
see an empty lot, you're going to see it covered with oxalis, and then it's going to be dead for the other 6 months of the year. So it's not going to contribute to healthy soil because it's going to die out.
Oh yeah, that's very true. And then the I think they're like the little bulblets or something are throughout all the seed bank for sure.
Yeah.
They can't keep on coming back. Cool. Another kind of smaller question is, are there any weeds that are edible or that are beneficial in that kind of way?
So, well, oxalis is edible. So there are books on foraging, urban foraging. Evidently, it's so bitter that it is considered a garnish, not a something you would make a whole salad out
Yeah.
of. But generally, so weeds can be weedy for two things. One is they can be true pests, meaning propagate on their own so extensively that they cause extinction of other plants and change of a habitat. So like Scotch broom, French broom, all the brooms that cover hillsides, they wipe out, instead of having 100 species in a square meter or on a hillside, which would bloom every month of the year. If a disease came in and wiped out one species, you still have 99 species, like bottles of beer on the wall. So you still have erosion control, et cetera, et cetera. Here you have monoculture. So monoculture is inherently unstable. So when you say beneficial weed, if it's a weed, it has a propensity to take over and make for monoculture. So no,
Yeah.
I don't think to me, there are no beneficial weeds.
If it's considered a weed, it's not
Yeah, yeah.
beneficial. Good, yeah. I'm gonna kind of keep on jumping around different questions, keep on throwing them at you. But I have someone asking about the use of horticultural vinegar and stuff like that for weed control. I know you're talking about different kinds of other kinds of pesticides and herbicides and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but yeah, what do you think about vinegar?
I mean, if you have, say, a beautiful rock pathway and two rocks are really, really close together and you just cannot get rid of that weed that's in that crack because even it's so narrow, you can't even get
Hmm.
your serrated knife edge through it. Sure, throw some vinegar on it. In a larger area, they're just going to grow back too quickly. And I think it's too short-term a solution. It's certainly safe for your environment, but it's going to be frustrating because the roots are storing carbohydrate just like the grazers, and they're going to go, oh, my top's gone, you know.
Yeah. No, actually, that went into the next question or another question that was asking about cracks in the sidewalk or rock areas and areas that are really hard to actually dig into and get the weed out. What's the best method for that? And I think one of them was talking about the herbicide or
Yeah.
the vinegar.
So
Anything
another
else?
thing is when you are designing a pathway, because a stone pathway is really, really pretty and really good for all weather, don't put the stones right next to each other. Set it in a bed of, say, decomposed granite, so they're an inch or two apart, so you don't have those microscopic cracks that you can't get your weeds out of. So yeah, I think it's a design flaw where you think it's more elegant to put them butt up against each other until that one weed grows. So I
Hmm.
would spread them out a little bit.
Give it a little bit of space so you actually can get in there and
Yeah,
work with
yeah.
it. Yeah,
Because it's
that
a
makes.
permeable pathway, especially if it's in gravel or decomposed granite. You've got a permeable pathway, which is great, but then you can, or use a desiccant. Vinegar would be a desiccant.
Very good. Maybe
Done.
just a few more. We're kind of getting through them, but I see more questions coming in as I talk. But I have someone talking about having larger plants or more established plants and then weeds coming up right at the very base of them, like,
Yes,
somewhere right at the trunk. And sometimes it's hard to get in there or you have to worry
yes,
about the plants. So how
yes.
would you approach
So
that?
it's amazing. I mean, plants are not stupid. And they're going to grow right next to your desired plant. And the reason is the one root fought all the big battles. I mean, it's plowing through earth that's probably pretty compacted and going forth in like 300 psi, 800 psi. I mean, these plant physiologists. I mean, you took botany, right? I mean, did you learn about the strength of a root tip and
Pretty impressive, yeah.
cracking through granite and cracking through asphalt? So could have hit hard pan, could have gone around a rock. So it was the original explorer. It was the dude that, you know, climbed Mount Everest first. And the weed is going to go, oh, I'm just going to course right next to you. You know, so it's that sod cutter. It's $9.99 at all your slope garden centers. You slip it right in between your plant and the weed, and you just flick under the crown of the weed. If it's not an oxalis, if you flick under, you will get rid of the weed and not damage your plant. So you just need to gently pull it away and get the crown, and you're done. But it will grow right next to your desired plant, no question. It's got
that's the easiest way to get into the soil, so that's where it's going to grow.
Yep.
All right. I have another question asking about using leaf litter as a mulch, and I think there's benefits and also drawbacks, and they're asking about the drawbacks because I think sometimes you're told to clear your leaf litter away for diseases and pests, but sometimes you use it as a mulch.
Yeah, so there's deciduous trees and there's evergreen trees. Deciduous trees generally have leaves that are thinner and lighter, and they blow away more easily. Evergreen trees do drop their leaves. They just don't drop their leaves all at the same time, but there is leaf drop and leaf replacement. The leaves tend to be heavier and thicker. And so if you have an oak, live oak, Quercus agrifolia, you'll have a leaf litter that will stick around just like a store-bought mulch. And within it, you're going to have your plants. Now with the movement of healthy soils and microorganisms and letting everybody sort of battle it out on their own, I'm seeing less advice about removing leaf litter for disease prevention. Because when you, just like if you have your whole food chain, you have the predators and the prey, like an insecticide will wipe out everything, and the herbaceous insects will reproduce more quickly than the predators, and you'll get an imbalance and you get more insects. Kind of Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with microorganisms in the soil. So I'm not seeing a disease problem with leaf litter. And especially if you have understory plants, then the leaf litter kind of gets hidden underneath the plant, so that it actually becomes more of a topsoil forming part of your garden. Just like a forest, I mean, has, you know, leaf litter, quote unquote, which is actually forming the next layer of soil for the plants to thrive on.
Yeah. All right. I think we are coming up a little bit closer to the end. I was actually asking more for my personal, just get my knowledge going. Could you go over again the monocots and dicots just for everyone, just because I think that's a really interesting topic, and the distinction of what they actually mean in the garden and for weeds.
To me, it's amazing that, I mean, for a long time, there were poisons to kill all plants. I mean, everybody knows about Roundup, but then they just fell upon a selective herbicide. Monocots and dicots are so different that you can put something on it and kill the broadleaf plants and leave the grass plants. So one idea of monocots and dicots is dicots were first, they're plants, angiosperms, they make flowers, they make seeds. And then the dinosaurs got wiped out. These megafauna started grazing, and the dicot seedlings were all vulnerable. They were going to get eaten with their two delicious seeds were up and have the growth center at the top. And so some plant invented, hey, I'm going to leave my growth center down here and just send up a leaf. So if you're taking a botany class, you will learn dicots have leaves like a maple tree, netted venation, monocot, parallel venation, orchids, lilies, grasses, dicot taproots, monocots, fibrous roots, dicots leaf flower parts in 4s and 5s, monocots in 3s. Your lilies have 3 petals, 3 sepals, alike color and texture. So you count 6 in your eyes, but it's really 3 and 3. So there's all these differences, but to me, the difference is growth center at the top, growth center at the bottom. If you carve your initials in a tree when you're 13 years old and you come back when you're 33, they're still where you carve them. The tree has the growth center above that and keeps growing top. But if you put your initials in a corn stalk or a bamboo, it would be way too high for you to see if you came back 33 years later.
Mhm.
So it was really the protection of the plant and the seedling stage that they moved their growth center to the ground. It's like, what a
Really cool
design. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, I always learned about it through like the petal counts and stuff, but I think learning about the growth points is definitely really the more important part, almost.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, to me, yeah.
Cool. I'm running out of little questions to ask you right here. I think there's a few other ones around. Any specific questions about maybe more specific plants or anything like that? Definitely come into our stores. We have a lot of information here that we pass around, and we're welcome to kind of get into the more nitty gritty of certain things. But yeah, is there any last kind of notes you want to go over or anything like that? I'm gonna close out.
Yeah, I mean, I was being facetious about having your friends help weed your garden, but actually, that is something that happens if you come visit me. So come with your knee pads and your own sod cutter, because you know, if we're gonna eat lunch from the garden, you're gonna weed the garden to have a healthier lunch.
Very true. I need to go home and weed my garden too, especially after all the rain we had earlier on in the year. A lot of them are coming up, and it's good to get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to just kind of give everyone a little bit of points about some upcoming stuff too, to kind of close it out and get any last questions in. We have another class coming up this coming Saturday that is all about growing veggies and fruits and food in your smaller garden. So it's going to be really good. It's going to be with Pam Pierce. It's going to be all about growing those things that you want to bring into your house and using a small amount of space, which many of us actually have. And I'm sure talking about weeds and dealing with that stuff is going to be part of that conversation too. So hopefully you can use this knowledge from this class on that as well. And then we have some other pruning classes coming up. I know that Joan's coming back later on in the year, I think sometime in, I think we say in April, I believe, to do some more classes. So you're not gonna see the last of her now. And yeah, I'm really excited to get going. Spring is coming, weeds are in our gardens, and we can kind of help dealing with them and look to the future. But yeah, it's gonna be a good year, hopefully. So good luck for everyone with that kind of stuff. And you can use this knowledge today on the rest of the year.
Cool.
But,
okay, happy weeding, or gardening rather.
happy gardening. Good luck with your weeding. Get your friends to come over. Hope everyone has a great day, a good happy Saturday. And thank you again, Joan Pont, for giving us this amazing talk. Really easy to understand and to bring into your knowledge.
Well, thanks for attending and tuning in. It's wonderful.
Yeah. All right. Well, goodbye, everyone. Have a good day and happy weeding. Bye.
Bye.